never die. And civilizations have the same habit. But they flower and decay like people. I've been traveling the continent recently to study the migration crisis, which has been going on for decades. Two things make it into a catastrophe. The first is the mass movement of millions of people into our continent. The second, that this should happen at precisely the moment our civilization lost faith in itself. For Europe was not just a continent, but a culture. Inviting the world in to join us meant changing that culture, becoming multicultural, a convener of the world's people. Today, Europe has become a home for anyone in the world who wants to call it home, while the European peoples are losing the only place they have to call home. Whenever the European publics get a chance to send a message to their politicians, they send the same one. Just slow the migration down. But they are consistently not listened to and called every type of name for their trouble. Europe's political class continue to evade the deep underlying questions they should have been asking years ago. We see this in the UK, where the Conservative Party offers Brexit as some kind of panacea and promises things they failed to do before, and a Labour Party which doesn't make any promises at all. The European publics understandably and consistently reject extremists of all stripes, but it leaves them morose without options. And while we may be able to avoid this discussion again this season, we won't be able to in perpetuity.
And Douglas Murray, author of The Strange Death of Europe, is with me now. Welcome to the programme. Michael, what did you make of what Douglas had to say?
I think there are some values in Europe which are really important and really worth defending. I'm not quite sure that I agree with Douglas that they're pan-European. I think they tend to be clustered in Western Europe and maybe even to some extent more in Northern Europe. But anyway, there are values that are really worth defending. And I think that Douglas has a point that we have acted as though these values needed no defence at all, that they didn't need assertion and repetition and reinforcement. And I think they do. Britain, because it is an island and because I think it is facing up to some of these problems, I think stands a good chance. But I do believe that the European Union faces existential threats, not least because it has no policy for migration and it is torn apart by the issue.
Liz?
I don't see a Europe in defeat and decline. We talked earlier about Le Pen being defeated in France, Wilders in the Netherlands, the AfD is down to 7% in the polls.
Indeed, it's in real trouble in Germany.
But without doubt, understanding people's concerns, particularly about very quick and large movements of different groups into Europe, is important. But when I look back, certainly in the history of my own city in Leicester, when 5,000 Ugandan Asians arrived in the early 70s, there was huge fear and uncertainty and a big campaign against them coming. But now we can't imagine our city without the hard work and entrepreneurialism of the Asians.
Well, let me put that to Douglas. Why exactly are migrants leading to the fall of Europe?
Well, the example that Liz gives is a very pertinent one, actually. That Ugandan Asian migration to Britain, we still talk about, like we still talk about the Huguenots. But that migration is now replicated all the time. Since 1997, when Blair came in, the same movement we had once of the Ugandan Asians into Britain happens every 6 weeks to Britain.
Right, but why is it leading to the fall, is what I'm trying to get to.
There's one particularly important point, I think, in this, is that we've made the presumption in Europe, and particularly on the continent, where it's very much more accentuated than it is here. We made a presumption that societies are places where you can bring in huge numbers of people all the time. I mean, 6,000 is an average 24 hours arrivals in one Italian island these days, and has been for recent years, 6,000. My view is that when you bring people in at that speed, at that scale, we make a fundamental mistake about our societies, and in actual fact, our societies and cultures are pretty fragile ecosystems. They're not things you can just keep on doing things to and expect the same thing to continue.
But why does migration lead to the fall of Europe? And I still don't understand why it's leading to the fall as opposed to creating problems as well as opportunities. But migration doesn't lead to the fall of the United States.
Well, there are several reasons for that. One is, of course, the United States is a country that was built on migration, and it actually has migration as an ideal, the idea of it being a place you go to and become part of the American dream.
Couldn't we do that too in Europe?
Well, if we did want to do that, then we should start quite soon, and we're not doing that.
But you wouldn't want to do it either, would you?
Well, no, that's not true. My contention is that if we'd had this movement of people, and we had had a clear idea of what we expected of people when they arrived, then it would be possible, it could be possible. But that is so far away from the discussion we've had for decades now, because we have consistently, I chart this in the book, we have been so muddle-headed about it. We had a time when we thought that everyone, for instance, Angela Merkel said this, we had a time after the war when we thought all the migrants would go home. We thought they wouldn't stay. The guest workers would do the job and then leave.
And Germany couldn't do without them now.
But that was a mistake. The fundamental thing about it was a mistaken idea. Then we had the idea that people would come and that they would become exactly like us. Then we said, we don't actually want you to become like us. We want you to celebrate your own culture, not the culture that we have in this country. And then we decided at some point in the last 10 years, actually, we do want you to become like us. These are totally different messages we've consistently given out.
It's remarkable.
Just a couple of comments before we get back to the video. You know, when Andrew asked Douglas about, America immigration, don't they have immigration there? What's happening over there? And Douglas said, yeah, I mean, that's part of America's history, is to have immigration. Well, one of the things is that you're talking about most of the immigration that's happening in America, when it was early on, we're talking about in the past century, that was everybody coming from Europe, white Europeans coming to settle in America. The Poles, the Italians, the Irish. You had very few coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And now the immigration basically is coming from where? The Latin American countries, Mexico, El Salvador, Nicaragua, these places. Yes, they have their own customs and cultures or whatever, but we haven't had to deal with the type of immigration that's coming from different religions, because most of the religious, the immigrants that were coming were either Christian, Catholic, Protestant, in that regard. So at least from a religious standpoint, there was some, similarities with the population that was already here in America. But now when you've got people that are coming from the Mideast, from India, from Eurasia, that are Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, that adds a completely different dimension. The other thing is that when the immigration is occurring in Europe, the immigrants are coming and being concentrated in basically huge cities. I mean, you talk about Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester, East London. That's where they're coming, and that's where they're basically coalescing. That's where they're congregating. That's where they're deciding to stay. They're not going out in the suburbs of England, suburbs of Western Europe, and living out, in the country. No, they're staying within the city limits. Now, here in the United States, you're seeing that, yes, they are around city, but they migrate out in the suburbs. And there aren't these, I guess, for lack of a better word, ghetto areas of where you just have immigrants, predominantly 60, 70, 80%, from one area or one ethnicity or one religion, that are basically forming pockets. That's what you don't see here, other than a couple of cities. One is Dearborn, Michigan, but that's like 70%. It's like, it's Arabs, about 25, 30% Arabs, but you have about 65, 70% Muslims, and you've got Christians inside there. You've got Druze there. You've got Coptic Christians. So you've got a whole smattering of Middle Eastern descent. But then again, within that population, you probably got first and second generation there as well. So it's a whole different dynamic, immigration in the United States, versus England. Anyways, that's what we have on tap for you today. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir. And if you haven't done so, my political prescription from my political perspective of what happens when you have Douglas Murray, Andrew Neil, and guests talking about immigration, culture, religion, immigrants, what's happening in Western Europe. let's get back to the interview right now.
The issues that there are, it's remarkable, I think, how well we've coped as a country. And it always strikes me that, you know, people come here because they see us as a land of opportunity, or where we believe
as they used to see America, a beacon,
and democracy, where they
a city on a hill,
exactly, where they value our freedoms, our democracy,
absolutely,
and they know that they can build a life.
I wouldn't absolutely guarantee that in all cases, Liz, if I may say so. I wouldn't guarantee that people move here because they want democracy. A lot of people,
you seem
I
to have
see
a bleaker view of what we are and what we can achieve than the people who come here.
Look, my view is that when you go to the places that people enter Europe, as I have done a lot, if you go to those places, you find people, not just people fleeing.
That lady there just virtue signaling as usual. I mean, not everybody is coming, okay? They're studying the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Magna Carta. That's not what they're doing. And when they come there, most people are coming for some reason because they want to leave what they're, you know, they want to leave the strife. They want to leave the economic uncertainty. They want to leave famine. They want to leave war zones. That's true. But when they come to Western Europe, many, many, many of them do not want to assimilate, do not want to integrate at all with society. And that's the problem that's occurring. So this lady really doesn't know what she's talking about.
Sub-Saharan Africans and others coming for a better life. Nobody blames them. We would do the same thing. The point is that Europe is a tantalizing prospect because of our wealth, because of our opportunity, and we do not have an attitude as a continent about who it is who should be here. We at the moment allow anyone who walks into Europe, or in the case of this, who goes a few miles off the Libyan coastline, to be picked up by European naval vessels and brought into Europe. And that seems to me to be a very unwise policy, because as I say, it is in the long term unsustainable and does not ask the fundamental questions we should be asking.
Hold on, I want to bring Michael back in. If Europe is in fall, surely, particularly the recent stagnation of Europe, that's much more to do with economic policy than with migration.
Well, I think governments have allowed very large numbers of people to come in without making an equivalent investment in public services, in schools, in health.
And that's happened in this country.
And that has happened in this country. And so people are very worried about what is occurring. I think it is true that if certain sorts of migrant arrive who are hungry for work, who are entrepreneurial and so on, this can drive your economy forward. But I think you also have to be very careful to move at a pace that the population can accept.
But the demography of Europe is a disaster for Europe. It's an aging population, particularly in Germany and in Italy. And an influx of younger people is surely what an economy needs. And I don't quite understand how the voters in Europe don't seem to agree with you. I mean, the French didn't agree with you. They have more reason than most to worry about migration because of the link with terrorism. They've just elected a pro-immigration president. Sure. The Germans are almost certainly going to re-elect Angela Merkel. She allowed 1 million refugees to come in with. Well, people seem to be coping.
First of all, on elections, I mean, this way in which Europe keeps on dodging bullets and thinking that no bullet was fired. I mean, you know, the Austrian Freedom Party... hang on. The Austrian Freedom Party got 46% of the vote. Everyone said, thank goodness we've seen off the far-right party. Geert Wilders comes only second in the Netherlands. Only a third of French people vote for Le Pen. If you want to consider how serious it is, look at the polling in France of what French people think about migration, and in particular issues of integration and culture. And the thing put in front of them, the Le Pen family again. Of course French people don't want the Le Pen family. And that is not the same thing as saying that they want the migration. And as very quickly for this issue about the ageing population, if it is the belief that people have in Europe that instead of dealing with pension problems and an ageing population, if people seriously think the best answer to that is to bring in the next generation of Germans from Eritrea, then it should be stated as a policy. But it does not seem to me to be the most wise way to approach the immigration or the ageing population issue.
Well, of course, there are immigrants coming in from many other areas than Eritrea. And
I give it as an example.
I think Douglas puts his finger on a point that whatever you think of this policy, it has never been exposed to a vote in Europe, in any European country. I mean, one of the novelties about our recent referendum on the European Union was that uniquely people were able to determine the future direction of their country. Yes. But many of the most important changes in our countries have occurred without anybody ever giving their
Absolutely.
assent.
So true. So true.
You know, maybe this is something on which you ought to have a referendum. But I think...
What would the question be?
Well, you know, do you wish to continue...
How many Eritreans do you want?
Could I give an example of one? The other week...
I mean...
the idea that people haven't voted on this issue, I don't buy.
Hold on.
Well, you would set before people a range of options about what sort of country they wanted. I mean, this is what voters have said to me. They've said, look, this is what our country now looks like. When was the moment that we voted for this? Could I
give an example of what could happen?
No, because I want to bring Liz in. I have to be fair to everybody here. Liz, and then I'll let you have the final word. Well,
the idea that people haven't expressed their views on immigration is just completely wrong. It was at the heart of the debate in the last general election and on the Brexit vote here. The same is true in what's just happened in France. And Macron isn't ignoring the issue. He's explicitly recognised people's fears and concerns, but he wants to offer real answers to those problems.
What answers is he offering? Stupid answers.
The idea it hasn't been debated. I spend all my life debating it. I just don't buy it.
I wonder if this lady, has she seen the riots that have been occurring in France with the yellow jacket police people out there? I mean, does she have a clue as to what's going on out there? And the French, what they're basically saying is they're trying to make it into a secular society. That's how they're dealing with it. You can't wear a headscarf. You can't wear a head covering out. You can't do all sorts of things. People would be saying that's infringing upon freedom of speech, freedom of expression. But the Macron government and the French people have decided overwhelmingly that this is the direction that they want to go in.
Let me bring it to now with a more general point, if I may, Douglas. I mean, whatever the politicians say, it seems to me in the 21st century, globalization in some form is here to stay. And surely that just comes with a huge movement of peoples. That is now the world we live in.
Well, if it is, then I think that the European publics ought to be prepared for that, and that they're not, and I think that they will not like it. Opinion across the continent consistently shows, irrespective of whether they reject Le Pen here, vote for somebody that second there, is that they want to slow it down. And the example I'd give is just very quickly, in February this year, Chatham House in London asked 10 countries in Europe whether they would agree with the statement that they want no more Muslims in particular, in Europe. And out of those countries, 8 out of the 10 countries, the majority of people agreed with that, and that included France and included Germany. And one of the only 2 countries where that wasn't a majority opinion was this one, where only 47% agreed with that statement. I think the political class in Europe would be mad not to listen to what the public are trying to say, decently and generally okay.
What, exclude Muslims from this country?
Saying, no, that's not my policy. It wouldn't be my belief. I'm saying you should listen to the public and try to move towards what they think, and absolutely provide leadership. But move towards the public. Don't just berate them.
Quite the interesting debate topic there, with Douglas Murray, Andrew Neil, and guests. And this is something that Europe, Western Europe, and other countries eventually are going to have to grapple with in terms of the immigration situation. How do you want to handle it? Who do you want to allow to enter? How will you decide which groups of people enter? What ethnicities? What religious classes? What minority classes? From which countries? I mean, there already governments do put, a certain amount, in terms of when they are giving out, visas, or when they're giving out green cards, or when they're giving out any type of, government policy to say we will allow X amount of people from this country, X amount from here, X amount from here, X amount for here, for immigration purposes, sort of like a lottery system. They're doing that to a certain extent now. But then they're going to have to do is, how are we going to handle the illegal situation that's coming, the boats that are coming across the seas, any other methods in which, illegals are crossing and entering countries in Western Europe. Obviously, with Britain being an island, that's a whole different, story. But look what they have to do in terms of warding off those boats. Or like you said, the boats are picking up these Libyan, immigrants off the coast or on the waters. The African immigrants, the African, migration that's coming across the seas as well. So this is a situation that these countries are going to have to do. We have our own problems that we're worrying about here in the United States of America from our southern border. And now they're talking, even there's stuff happening on the northern border. But predominantly 95% is coming across. And we're talking people from Latin America, from Mexico, Guadalajara, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all these Latin American countries, and they're coming across the border and just being allowed to enter. And again, overwhelming services. Look at what's happening in our cities with the sanctuary things that are going on. Now everybody's crying and saying, "What's happening?" Now they don't have money for these illegals, and now they're wondering what's the government going to do when it was just a border problem. In the United States, from the southern border, it was only affecting, states like California, states like Phoenix, Arizona, California, Texas and whatever. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. But as soon as they started coming inland and into Democratic controlled cities, New York, Baltimore, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, when you start doing things like that, now everyone's up in arms and saying, what's happening? I can't get to an attorney. They're backed up. I can't get, my school, the schools are being overrun by illegals because they have to, house illegals there overnight or for days or weeks because there's no place to put them. And the local population, the residents of the city are saying, what the hell's going on? Why am I being relegated to, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 9th, 10th status? What the heck's happening here? So we have our own problems here in the United States that's going on with the Biden administration just opening the doors, the floodgates, literally. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Put your comments down below. Take a look at our other video links above and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.